Hi, everyone. A little bit of a hiatus since our last meeting, so thank you guys for joining. I'll go ahead and kick things off. A couple of things. I just sent out a note, which I think many of you, pretty much everybody was copied on, that I'm going to close town hall tonight. The weather forecast that came in about 90 minutes ago said we'll have accumulations in the 10 to 14 inch range. It'll start off with rain and sleet around midnight and then switch over to snow at, call it 3 o'clock tomorrow. And so it should be going pretty strong through certainly mid-morning. So Ed has mobilized our ground clearing crews and snowplow crews, so they'll all be on tap. But the town hall, we're going to have that closed all day tomorrow, and then folks will return to town hall on Wednesday. Jill, have you guys made a decision for the schools?
We have not, but Alan is on a call with a bunch of superintendents right now.
Okay. All right. So in case town hall's closed, the transfer station will also be closed. That's another thing we're going to make that happen as well. Second thing is the Board of Selectmen voted to finalize its budget, which we will hand over formally to the Board of Finance, I think March 5th or first week in March. A couple of highlights for that. The budget itself, if I look at just the Board of Selectmen, excluding debt service, the adopted budget in 2023-24 was just over 38 million. The budget that we're proposing is $41 million, and that's an 8% increase over the 2023-2024 budget. So a fairly substantial increase. If you look at the Board of Selectmen budget, including all the revenue sources, Board of Selectmen capital, as well as debt service, in other words, everything except the schools, which would include net Board of Education and Board of Education capital, that increase stands at 8.8%. And again, a fairly substantial number. We've done a number of things to control that, but it's even at the Board of Selectmen level, we think it's, despite the big numbers, a fairly lean budget. Some of the key drivers of that expense are the following. One is police patrol costs include a 53rd officer. The net cost of that in the coming fiscal year is only half what that person would cost because it assumes that the new hire doesn't take place till January 1st. But that police patrol costs for next year are up by just over $400,000, and that reflects both this additional officer as well as contractual pay increases for that group. Another issue that we have is in waste management. So we're having to renegotiate the contract with Stanford over that. And Ed is forecasting kind of worst case scenario for that, which is about $382,000. And then finally, we have a worst case scenario built in for pensions for next year, which includes both health insurance as well as pension contributions. And that's about 1.3 million. So if you add up those three, it's about 2.3 million of the kind of 3 million that we have as a dollar increase for next year. I'm sorry, about 4 million. So this is total Board of Education, Board of Selectmen, debt service, CapEx, and revenue. It's about a $3.5 million increase, of which about call it 2.2 million are just those three categories that I mentioned. One other change that we've implemented from what Kate gave us was to put in $225,000 for Great Island maintenance. The way this has been done in the past is that the revenue from rental income for Great Island was used to provide for all the maintenance for the island, and I was running about $400,000 a year. As you all know, the stables and the folks who have been renting the stables have decided not to renew their lease. And so given the loss of that rental income, we feel we need to add to the Great Island Management Fund about $225,000 to cover that. So that's another source of that increase. So all in all, 8.8%, which is the total for everything excluding Board of Education. If you were to cut just the Board of Selectmen excluding debt service, instead of an 8% increase to get it down to 6%, you'd have to come up with a cut of about 767,000. And then to get it down to 4%, it would be, call it $1.5 million. So not small cuts to get them down to the Board of Finance guidance levels. We looked pretty hard for all that. the obvious sources of further cuts, if the Board of Finance wants to do that, are in town services, which we could look at if that's essential. We could also cut out some of the capital. We think we've cut everything that could reasonably be bonded, like for example, the fire tanker that's scheduled to be replaced next year. The rest of it, unfortunately, really looks like capital we're going to have to get at some point anyway. You could defer it, but that means just deferring it into future years when debt service is going to be higher because of the schools in Ox Ridge. So like the Board of Education, there aren't really easy answers for any of this. We look forward to a more detailed dialogue with the Board of Finance when we present that on the 5th, and to working with them to provide answers as they conduct their analysis. Let me stop there and see if anybody has any questions. Okay.
No questions, it's just big numbers,
Yeah.
Talking to you as a former member of the Board of Finance is a little gratuitous, I guess.
Well, I mean, I did pull out and dust off the Board of Finance hat. I mean, there's here and there stuff that could be cut. A lot of the capital, as I said before, we're going to have to do it anyway. And if we defer it, the future budget years, at least in the next few years, are going to be difficult as well. So I don't know. Let's have a fresh set of eyes with the Board of Finance. Let's take another look at it. As I said, we'll have a more fulsome discussion on the 5th. One thing that we did do that's raised one bit of concern is that, as everyone knows, we had ARPA funding come to the town of about $6.2 million for the town side. I think it was 800 or 900 for the Board of Education. We decided to reallocate some of the ARPA funds to cover some of the capital that's in this budget. The total amount was just under $500,000. And those funds came from allocations that we had made to projects that are going to be very hard to fund. So, for example, a number of the allocation decisions were to send money to nonprofits to help them with some of the work that they do. It turns out that the paperwork requirements for managing any kind of contributions to a nonprofit are really onerous. And we've decided that it's best not to fund those projects. And so we're going to have a meeting of the ARPA committee to discuss that in some detail. We think these are fairly obvious allocations that you would make, given the difficulty in allocating the funds as we had hoped. I think there are some other reallocations that we could do, but I will leave that to the committee to sort through. So we will have that committee meet before the budget discussion with the Board of Finance in early March. Okay.
John, is the intention to have the ARPA committee sort of sign off on, on those projects, whether they're approved or just whether or not we're reallocating ARPA funds or using tax dollars?
We're going to review the reallocations in detail with the ARPA committee. So I'd like to get their approval for it. I'm going to recommend approval and explain why I think we should, but we'll definitely have that group meet before the Board of Finance meeting on the 5th.
Got it.
Okay. A couple other things. I have continued the video program for trying to provide information to town citizens. I just finished one on pickleball. So if you want to take a look, that's available on TV 79. We're going to be filming this week for our next one, which is about Great Island access. And the police department's got a drone, which we're going to use for some drone footage showing you how you access Great Island, where parking is, and just where you're supposed to walk, given the pedestrian rules that we have in place. So it should be great. I'm hoping to have that filmed. Again, we've got weather issues, but have that filmed by the end of this week. And with any luck, we'll get it out next week. So more to come on that, but a video production about Great Island access is coming. Last thing I'd say is that I kind of like this video format for our OPC meetings, so we'll consider some changes again in the future, but for right now, this seems like a good idea. I know it's hard for some folks to make an early morning meeting before going off to work, so maybe we can make a format like this work at more convenient times for everybody. So we'll continue to experiment with that, but that was the intent of doing this by video. That's all I've got. Any questions for me? All right, let's hand it over to Seth.
Thank you. I think my mic is on.
It is.
So the Rules Committee meets tonight to set the agenda for the RTM meeting coming up on the 26th. We have to put we still have to put a person on the Board of Ethics. And it's not an easy thing because under Robert's rules, it's got to be a majority of those present and voting, and that's been difficult. We're split about a third between three candidates, so we'll have an interesting. That'll be on the RTM agenda. We're going to also have an update on the on ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. Jack Davis probably will do that. And do an update on Great Island. We have a member of the committee, and Mark Adeletta gets in and talks about that. We were getting a little ahead of ourselves in funding your special ed transportation, Jill, but it's not quite ready yet. So we'll do that on the next go round.
Thank you, Seth.
Then we just have some leases that have to be updated on Great Island, and so those will all be covered. So that's what's coming up on the RTM meeting at the end of the month. Most likely, Rules Committee hasn't voted on it yet. For those Rules Committee members listening, I just want to make that clarification. You haven't voted yet, and so that's really what's going on in the RTM.
Okay, thank you, Seth. Tracy.
Thank you. I don't really have much of an update at this point. Our session started last week. And, as I will say every time, if anybody has any local issues that they feel need to be dealt with on a state level, please get in touch with me. My committee meetings all start this week. I'm on public health, transportation, and education. But as usual, people, of course, should be reaching out with any issue they have. And I have been showing people how to follow bills, how to follow committees in case they're interested in public safety or environment. And I will continue to do that. And I will keep you guys updated whenever we have anything that's specific with town. But I guess I will open it up now if there's anything you all have that you're interested in. And actually, I said before I say that, because I don't want Jill to jump in and say we're obviously one of the issues in education is the right to read. And Darien has been big advocates for making sure that the Darien Board of Education is on top of a lot of the right to read or reading issues in Darien. And right now, the state is mandating that all schools conform to a particular textbook or program. And that's kind of a precedent that's never been set before. The state has never come in and said you have to use these type of math books or you have to use this type of history books. So this is kind of a precedent that we haven't seen. And it's going to be a big price tag to all of our towns. It could be anywhere from $500 to $1 million. And actually I say that, but the price has now gone up for all of these programs. So we're a little bit in limbo right now. Lots of districts are upset about this mandate coming from the state, including Darien, who has, one of the top performing districts in the state. At 75% of the kids in third grade are reading on grade level. So it's a bit of an issue, and we do know that at the committee level, but it seems to be that part of our regulations that went through between that and actually making it to the State Department and the implementation, there's a disconnect. So we're aware of that. Thank you to Jill and to our superintendent, who have been very outspoken at the issues around this and helping us all understand where the issues are. And if anybody else has any other issues, please let me know.
Was there a reason that they decided to be prescriptive on methodology as opposed to merely outcome. So in other words, to say, as long as you're meeting a particular outcome, we don't care. But if you're not, then we'll intervene instead of intervening more broadly.
It is partly because we are having a, low reading in many of our districts. And I think, Jill, you can jump in and intervene wherever you see fit, but there was a process of reading that, with only phonics that they have found that is not as effective as the science of reading, which is a different way to teach. And it's more like, but sorry, I'm gonna back up. Yeah. Phonics is the way we're wanting to teach, but the other process, which was more of a sight word, is where we found out we should not be teaching. So the science of reading is more phonics based, and that's where they're wanting to make sure that the schools are doing that. So you're right. Normally it would be something to the effect of, we want our schools to be teaching with phonics, and then you get to pick out how you do that. And Darien, many years ago, figured that out as well, and are using programs that teach phonics in our classes as well, but they're not using the prescriptive textbooks and programs that the state has deemed the better ones, even though there's not proof around them. Jill, did I sum that up okay?
Yes, I think the reality is with reading is that we have a lot of different students with a lot of different ways of learning, and a good program meets different students where they are and should be based in actually a lot of different theory. There are children who respond well to whole language learning, and there are children who definitively do not and who need science of reading. So at any rate, the role of the state is really what's at question, as is the interplay between state bodies, because there's what the legislation intended, and then there's what the State Department of Education actually put forward. There's the fact that the level of effort required to attain a waiver was significant. There are no resources associated. And John, I can see you talking, but you're on mute. Or maybe he's talking to Linda. And then there was unevenness of the application of a passing grade. So we're a little confused at why some of the districts with higher levels of reading scores are receiving partial or not waivers at all, whereas some of our districts with who are low performing are receiving waivers just based on the purchase of a program. So we are in agreement that all children should read, and that that's important, but there is work to be done on how this process has been rolled out to date and the role of each of the organizations involved.
And it was definitely confirmed that competency of reading and the reading levels were not used within the waiver, which is interesting. So to be continued.
Okay, Steve.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thanks, John. What I want to talk about, we have a meeting. It's supposed to be scheduled for tomorrow night. It's now going to be canceled. I think we're going to have a special meeting either tomorrow afternoon or the next day or so via Zoom of the commission. The things that are on our list right now for tomorrow's meeting that's going to be canceled is the final resolution discussion for Great Island. And the bigger public hearing was the hearing for ADUs. The ADU discussion is something that the town opted out of, I'm going to say 2 years ago when we had the opportunity to. It was in 2021. We want that meeting to be in person and be a well-attended public hearing. So we're going to have that on a later date. The Great Island, we're just going to go over the resolution in a special meeting to make sure that P&Z does their part to keep the ball rolling on the application that's in front of us now, which is 100% deals with parcel 23A, which is the road. The biggest happenings in the last week is Darien is still a very sought after town to develop in for all kinds of reasons. Last week we saw applications and pre-applications for another 3 developments that want to be able to build in Darien. And those dwelling units, if they all got approved and they all come forth with the way they are, would add another 209 units of multifamily housing for the town of Darien over the next, 2 or 3 years. If they got approved today, they wouldn't be opening for at least 2 years because that's how long construction takes. I ran some quick numbers on that aspect, and I'm pretty actually kind of sort of proud of them. Since the opening of where Roost is and Danny's Bicycle Shop in Pure Bar to today, Darien has added 189 multifamily apartment units. We have 141 that are under construction as of today. There are 60 that are approved and they've not broken ground yet. And then we have the 209 that I just spoke about that are new applications. All total, that is 599 new apartments for the town of Darien. So in terms of Tracy Mara, I hope, you and I get to talk again. Keeping notes, I do think the town of Darien is doing their fair share to help diversify our housing. The other thing that's pretty timely, that's important to me is in our housing trust fund, we're going to try to start to put more money into the housing trust fund in any way, shape, or form that we can. Some developers would like to put money into the housing trust fund, which is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, is the exact name of it. Right now, there's $195,000 in change in that trust fund. That money came from basically Federal Realty. When the Palmer Development, the Vacaros have to finish we call them stub units. They'll put another chunk of money in there. And some of the other developers that have applications in the pipeline, they would rather put money into the trust fund to do a fee in lieu, is what we call it, versus building the properties on site or off site. So that's another new development that we have. The other thing that I just want to touch on really quick is over the last couple months, we have settled about 4 lawsuits or appeals that were against the town of Darien that were settled and moved out. There was one appeal relative to the stables that was dropped. There was another one that was on Brookside Road that was dropped, and there was another one between 2 homeowners and a decision that we did. It's called the Hardy Brown decision. That one was also dropped in the last 2 weeks. So to date, right now, we only have, I think, 3 appeals still in process that we're working on in town, and our legal counsel is going to give us an update on that in one of our next meetings. Also on my list, I have a couple other items, but you could watch it on TV 79 if you want to. A lot of the things that we approved over the last couple of years are all basically open and ready to go and finished, which is always nice to see. New businesses opened, last week, next week, 2 weeks ago. And so all the work that we've, putting on the planning zoning side is now you can see the doors opening and people going in and out of the buildings that were approved. That's pretty much it for me. Any questions?
Terrific. There was a note that I think you and John Cini and others worked on a while back. There was an update that provided kind of a fulsome overview of all of our affordable housing efforts in town, and kind of a great sort of from to story that showed all the efforts that we'd embarked on. We talked about a while back about updating that note. I think that's a great idea and would be just a good asset to have fresh and handy, should there be media inquiries as a lot of the housing takes shape here in town. If you would like to work on that or could use my help or want to set up a team to update that note, that seems like a great idea. What do you think? We have that list. We started it in 2020 and it was a 20-year look back. I think we published it, in March of 20, either 20 or 2021, the month that COVID started. And yes, it was a 20-year look back. That is what I call a living list. Jeremy maintains it, once a month, every 2 months, and adds to the bottom of the list of things that have come off, things that have come on. But yeah, we can do that. I think what we did
and what John Cini is referencing, and that we wrote a it was under Jamie's signature. There was a press release that we put out. It was a joint press release from the first selectman's office and the P&Z office about the number of units that we did over the years. So if you read the papers, there was some article recently that I saw over the weekend relative to that. And yeah, that's something that we could definitely put out again. And I would definitely like to do it with the selectman's office too, or the first selectman's office, touting what we did. This example I just gave you, I didn't go back till a long time ago, but I think everybody knows where Roost is and where Danny's Bicycle Shop is and where Pure Bar is. If you start at that point and go to today, those are the numbers I gave you. But it's, you know, Darien is sought after place to live and build. You know, so we just have to keep our eye on it. We have to plan and zone for it, or zone and plan for it.
Yeah. Okay, one addendum to my town hall closure. So town hall will remain open tonight for anybody who has meetings tonight. So I know RTC is meeting tonight, like Coastal Waters is meeting, and the RTM Rules Committee is meeting. If you guys want to keep those meetings tonight, the rain doesn't really start till midnight, so please, town hall is going to be open for that. So keep those in-person meetings scheduled as you see fit.
Thank you for that.
Yep. Jill.
I had one quick question for Steve, just about where we stand with the state mandates on affordable housing. Are we in compliance, or, you know, I hadn't heard much about it recently, but I've imagined their mandates are still there somewhere.
The mandates are still there. They haven't changed, that's for sure. The one thing I can tell you is the town of Darien was awarded 2 moratoriums over the last, was it 7 years or 8 years, going back when it was? I think it's actually 8 years, to be honest with you.
Those were what,
After-
4-year?
I'm sorry?
Those were 4-year?
They're 4-year moratoriums, yes. And we ordered 2 of them, so 4 + 4 equals 8.
Yeah.
It's been off for a year. After the phase 2, I call it, of Corbin, which is 76 units, and then the fulfillment of the Palmer's site, which is now called the Heights, that's another 65 units. Once we get those 2 developments in the bank, we're going to go back and start to count moratorium points and see how close or how far we are to at this point in time, we're not close enough. And those are the next ones they're going to hit. So once we get those finished and those points in the bank, then we're going to count them up, see how far away we are.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. Jill, go ahead.
Okay. I'll start with finance as you did, but I'll start with the current year. As of our January 18th finance meeting, our projections put us at a projected deficit of about $418K. That we continue to monitor it and will, but we're assuming we'll be asking for a supplemental appropriation of the Board of Finance and the RTM this spring to make up for that. We're running a surplus in general education, but a deficit of $630K in special education. Some of the drivers of that are that we're continuing to experience increased costs, new requirements, and intensity of our student needs. And we are, certainly going to continue to meet needs appropriately. So that does sort of bring us to some of the drivers for this budget season that we're in. We have not passed our budget yet. It was scheduled for tomorrow, but with the snow, we are trying to figure out when we're actually going to hold that meeting. For the next fiscal year, the superintendent's budget was presented to us with a 6.19% budgetary increase, or a budget of about $121.5 million. We are aware that this number is high, as you are, John, for your budget. Our average increase over the past 10 years was 3.7%, ranging from a high of 5.3 in fiscal year 2015 to a low of 2.8 in fiscal year 18. We're also aware of the significant expended and planned investments in school facilities, including $63 million appropriated for Oxbridge, $101 million appropriated for HHR, and future needs at several of our other buildings, particularly middle school. Excuse me one second. Sheppy, this is not a good time. I'm going to need you to leave the room right now. Thank you. While we believe in the importance of education and the value this community places on its schools and the little ones like that one, We're also aware of the importance of investing wisely in town resources overall and understand the potential impact of the revaluation on some of our families in town. With all of that in mind, as we've focused on a thorough review of the budgetary items actually in our remit, we've continued to identify efficiencies where we can and to review the educational goals and impacts of the budgetary initiatives on the table. It has not been easy. We'll vote, again, as I said, it was planned to go for a vote tomorrow, possibly Wednesday, maybe Thursday. I'll know more in about an hour. And then we will present our budget to the Board of Finance along with the Board of Selectmen on the 5th. If there's not a mutually suitable number at the end of this, like John, we'll work collaboratively with our partners at the Board of Finance and the RTM. We've made some adjustments to our budget process this year, several of which were very successful. We do plan to take another deep dive on our budget process when this is over, and we'll be looking not only within our own board, but also at intra-board discussions vis-a-vis overall town fiscal and operational planning. One of the items that I'd like to note that we've been looking at as part of our budget process is transportation. Our bus contract is a 5-year contract, and I've asked Rich to join me specifically for this conversation. There are 3 components of our bus contract that we look at. Right now, we have the potential for a special appropriation to take over all of our special education transportation, possibly for this next fiscal year. That vote will happen alongside our overall budget vote, and it would run parallel to our budget, but it would be a special appropriation of about $850,000, which would be 1 Suburban and 1 ADA wheelchair van, which we were already planning. But we're also now looking at 5 Type 2 buses, and 5 Type 2 buses. That would be, as I said, about $850,000. Projected savings in this year would be just over $400,000, with a 3-year savings of about $1.6 million. Looking beyond special education transportation, which we're not planning for this year or indeed in the near term, but as we look at the bus contract and talk about budgeting, we want to put on the table, we don't have any place to park our large buses. So the Type 2 buses are usually 30-person buses. The large buses are about 75. If we had a parking lot somewhere in town, we would save about $500,000 on our bus contract. If we went further and actually took over buses altogether, we would need to purchase about 30 buses. We would need a place to do maintenance and service, a way to fill them, et cetera. So we're looking at special education specifically in this budget year. In the coming years, we'd like to be talking to you all about the possibility of parking buses and or even taking over all busing and what that would mean for town facilities. In this year, looking at special education buses, we would need a place to park them. So we have identified to Steve in Planning and Zoning that we'd like, assuming it goes through the BOE vote, we'd be coming to P&Z for approval for a place to park. Okay. I think I'll stop and see if there's any questions on that specifically.
Questions for Jill?
I had one, in taking over the transportation, does that mean you also take over the maintenance?
Yes.
So who does the maintenance of the buses? Do you have to go outside for that, or is it within the town, or?
We have a mechanic on staff today and could handle it at the Public Works Garage. Anything more significant, we bring to a private mechanic. Rich, anything you want to add to that?
So as Jill mentioned, so the Suburbans we have now, things like oil changes, fluid changes, brake pad changes. We do have a mechanic who's a district employee who handles that, and they would handle those type of maintenance projects in-house. If it's something more elaborate, like the issue with like a wheelchair lift, we'd probably have to contract that out with the mechanic.
Thank you.
So when you maintain the Suburbans and do oil change, do you do that at the Public Works Garage?
We do.
Okay. So it's a joint effort. I mean, we're all on the same team, right?
Well, the maintenance employee is a Board of Ed employee. And so our maintenance shop is where the Public Works Garage is. So we bring the vehicles over there. He does, whether it's the oil changes or the brake pads, things like that. And then we'll bring the vehicle back to 35 Woodbury.
If you get down to the minutia, is there, this is the Port of Edge oil and this is the town's oil? Do you get into that, or is it the same?
So we do reimburse the town for any like gas that we pay for the vehicles, or we actually go out and buy like the oil for the oil changes.
But it's kind of easy.
Yeah, it's not really an issue.
Cool, thanks.
Tracy,
Yeah, so I'm trying to answer my own question here because I believe the buses that you would purchase now would have to be electric. I don't know if that's just city buses or if that's with school buses too. So that's what I'm having to look into now, because I know that the city buses now, they've just passed their deadline for purchasing gas buses. And if that's the case, then things like insurance and storage will be a, different issue. Like you wouldn't be able to store them in a garage area. Just something to think about.
So the deadline for electric for school buses, I believe, is 2035.
Okay.
So these type 2 buses and Suburbans are gas vehicles.
Yeah, I assume the Suburban, but I just didn't know if the school buses are still 2035.
Yeah, so those are the 72 passenger long buses that are 2035. So not the type of buses that we're talking about here.
Okay, all right, fine, good.
Thank you, Tracy.
other questions for Jill?
Just real quick, relative to the buses, did you, Rich, say that the type 2 are gas, not diesel?
Correct, they're gas.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks.
And Rich, it's Jim here. When do we typically sign the new contract for the buses? And is that an annual contract that we sign and extend, or is that
So it's a
multi-year?
5-year contract. So our contract is up at the end of this current school year. And we did put it out to bid. We did get 2 bids, though really only 1 realistic bid. And so right now we're going back and forth with the attorneys for the actual contract language, and it would be expected that we'd sign it in the spring.
So would you sign this for next year before the budget for next year is approved, or do you sign that in connection with the RTM and Board of Finance approving?
So we
the
typically
budgets?
would wait until the RTM votes on, I think it's May 9th or whatever that date is.
Got it. Okay. And then how does that, just curious, how does that contract work? Is that a just given the way appropriations work, is that a multi-year non-cancelable contract, or is that a just multi-year pricing agreement and you can bring it up or down in terms of school buses each year?
So you can change the quantity of buses, so you're not locked into the quantity of buses. We can also terminate with either cause or no cause. I think it's about 90 days notice. The concern is obviously if you terminate for either reason, you'd have to have a suitable provider, whether it's yourself or another company. And those long buses, like the 72 passenger buses, that's about a year-long process to actually get those vehicles.
Well, it definitely won't be me driving, so.
I'd love to be a bus driver.
The other quick thing I note if we're done with buses is just that we're nearing the end of an overall policy audit and review. We're now looking specifically at board governance. One of the policies we've been looking at includes how we fill a vacancy, which is of interest because we did recently have to do that. And we're looking at our alignment, but we're looking at alignment between our policy, state statute, and the town charter. Items we've identified for consideration include more flexible timing, the notification process, and the work with local town committees. And I note that here again because we have different language. Our language is more specific than what's in the town charter, and we are talking about whether the town clerk, for example, needs to be involved in our notification process, John. So, that's just something that we had written into our policy. It's not required by statute or charter, but anyway, stuff we're talking about. And so I just noted here.
Okay. Last but not least, Mr. Palin.
Thanks, John. So heads up, we have a meeting tomorrow night. We modified that early this morning to switch it to be a special meeting, and it's going to be a hybrid meeting. So we'll be able to either If town hall was open, which it sounds like it's not going to be, we could have done it in person, but if it is closed, we can still conduct business remotely. So nothing significant on that on tomorrow night's agenda. Our board has been listening to and watching all of the meetings that the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen have had, in preparing and discussing their budgets. I made some comments at one of the Board of Ed meetings a couple of weeks ago, regarding at least where initially that budget was shaking out. And, just to remind everybody, on December 11th, during the State of the Town, the guidance that was given was sort of in the 3 to 4% context. So if we're looking at sort of 6% and 8% budgets, that's almost 2 times what the original guidance was. Now, as you all know, we take the expenditures and or net expenditures that you're both proposing, and there are a number of other variables that should come into place. One is what's going on with the grand list, and setting aside the revaluation, which is pushed up on average all homes, all properties by about 29%. There's also growth in the grand list. So in looking at your 2 budgets and deciding sort of what we think is prudent, we'll be looking at, again, not only your expenditures, but what's happening to the growth of the grand list. Steve has spoken about a lot of the sort of development that we've seen over the last couple of years, and that's coming online, this year and next year. And we'll also look at, the general fund that we closed out last year in the audit north of $30 million. So that's above our kind of minimum threshold that we've set, and it's above our historical guidance that we've relied on in order to maintain our AAA rating. This year there have been some changes both in the state statutes and therefore the rating agencies with how they're looking at sizing that reserve. And so our board will be taking a very close look at, how much money we should be keeping that reserve. And if we can use some of that money this year to fund some of the smaller capital projects. As you know, we have never used excess funds in the general fund to fund a known operating expense. It's always been for known capital expenses. And then in some cases, we've used it to fund unexpected mid-year appropriations, like during COVID, like we did with the Board of Ed. But what we'll be doing is taking your 2 budgets, grand list, cash, bonding, a further look at revenues, including investment revenues, and ultimately looking at what does that do to the overall tax bill that we need to pass through to our residents, and what does that do for the mill rate, again, after having adjusted for the 29% on average growth in the valuation. It's hard not to mention that, with 8% and 6% numbers, that's a fairly big hit to our taxpayers, on top of some of which are going to see big volatility in the taxes that they themselves pay. I had a few pages in my State of the Town speech that talked to what was actually happening within the grant list when you dig deeper down below that 29% average. And when you look at it in different quintiles, you'll see that 29 to 30% average still holds. But when you dig deeper down within those, you'll see that there are significant variances in the actual revaluations of people's properties, which is going to cause some real volatility in taxes. And so I think our board, I expect, is going to take a very hard and close look at all of the expenditures and making sure that we're looking at all efficiencies that can be realized. And I think it's really incumbent on all of our boards to make sure that we're constantly valuing any new increases, new staffing, and we're going back and looking at old programs and making sure that old programs that may have been put in place 4, 6, 8 years ago, under different administrations or different leaderships, are those still the right programs for today? So I think those are all things that the Board of Finance will be looking at once we officially get handed your budgets on on May 5th, and then we vote, in mid-April. Outside of the budget, we have about $85 million of one-year notes that come due in late April. So we're going to be looking to go to market in sort of early to mid-April, depending on what markets look like and when we get finished up with the audit and marketing materials and so forth. And we'll be looking at whether we roll some of those bands into another one-year piece of paper, or whether we decide to term out some of those into longer-term 30-year debt. I think a lot of that will really depend on kind of what the markets look like, after the next Fed meeting.
Okay, questions for Jim?
I would just say that the RTM subcommittees have been active in working with both the Board of Ed and later we work with and with the Board of Selectmen, and then we get together with the Board of Finance in the end. Early involvement, we found, makes the whole process go a lot better when the budget actually gets on the floor of the RTM. And I think, Jim, your thought about taking all the sources, all the pieces, and putting them in together to try and manage these increases is the best way to go. So I wish you well on that.
Well, Seth, certainly remind all your members that, the Board of Finance certainly encourages all your various committees and members, if they have comments, questions, ideas on the budget that they want us, the 7 of us, to incorporate as we analyze it and as we ultimately vote on it and pass it along to you, that they should, please give us that feedback.
The Rules Committee of the RTM actively encourages those people we have assigned to work on the budgets, the dialogue. So we anticipate that will continue.
That's great. And as you know, I think, as a reminder, when the budgets come to us, we have the ability to adjust the budgets and sort of put together the overall spending package in between tax dollars, cash, and bonding, and kind of pass it along to the RTM. And once it gets to the RTM, their general, their choice is usually either to sort of pass, reduce, or reject. So if they have,
which is why we try and dialogue as we're going along.
Exactly. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to myself or the committee as a whole if they have any comments, or certainly come to our meetings.
And one thing you also might consider doing is with the grand list increase that we got because of the higher valuations, there's kind of maybe 2 components to that. There's the increase in the value of existing properties, same store sales, if you will. And then there's the increase in the grand list due to additions resulting from new developments. And I know a lot of that's not online yet, but it might be interesting to show those 2 components of the increase in the grand list, and maybe show taxpayers what their taxes would have been without the additions, right? So without some of these new developments, they're starting to pay higher taxes than they were when they were still under construction, and maybe even pro forma for some of the developments once they're completed, just to give folks a sense that, look, your taxes are perhaps going up in part because we have these new developments, but they would have been modestly higher otherwise without them.
Yeah, I have a request into Tony and his team working on that. I think, directionally, if you look at, John, if you look at price and quantity, I think the quantity piece of it probably would cover about 0.5% of the increase in taxes. So a 6% increase in expenditures could be moved down to a 5.5% increase solely as a result of the quantity of the grand list.
Yeah, showing that analysis as part of all these difficult discussions might help with pain relief. Not much, but a little.
The only thing I would add to that, John and Jim, is that the additions to the residential side of the grant list has also been very high in the last, 5 years, which has went back. I mean,
Yes.
yes, I mean, I've touted the commercial side's about a $300 million increase, but the residential side is also a significant number.
Lots of brand new and renovated, fit and fully renovated houses in the last 5 years for sure. So.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We are working to get the March meeting of the OPC on the calendar, and we'll make that one virtual as well. If any of you have suggestions for format or for timing, I think this hopefully works well for everybody to have something like this. We'll try to keep them to an hour, which we've been able to do today, and try to make this more efficient. That's all I had. Does anybody else have anything further?
Nope.
Okay, motion to adjourn. Okay, Steve, Jill.
Second.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you. Have a good evening. Stay
Thanks
safe.
all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, John.